All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Annie Lepley. Welcome to a conversation with Katie Fehlinger. I'm the Assistant Director of Delaware County Libraries, and I'm joined this evening by my colleague, Teresa Dykes. And I'm going to pass it over to Teresa to introduce Katie.
Thank you, Annie. We are very excited to have Katie with us tonight. Katie's a twin mom, author and entrepreneur, public speaker, and DIY junkie. I love that. Prior to switching her professional focus in September 2019, Katie delivered the weather forecast on CBS 3 Eyewitness News this morning. She also made professional stops in New York, AccuWeather, and WLVT. She worked as a regular game day meteorologist regionally. Katie also appeared on a host of major networks like ESPN, ABC, Fox News, Fox Business, and Bloomberg. In addition to her TV resume, she's worked extensively in radio, including a multi-year run on KYW. Katie's book, My Happy Place, How I DIY'd My Own Bliss, was released on July 20th. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and most importantly, at Delaware County Libraries. So welcome, Katie. We're so glad to have you with us tonight.
I am beyond excited to be here. Everybody just give me a thumbs up. You hear me okay? I always worry about that. Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
We are very excited. So Katie's going to do a little reading for us from her book.
I am. I hemmed and hawed about what I wanted to read from this. I'm not sure why, but I finally settled on it. And I did see a handful of people holding up their own copies. If you want to follow along with me, I'm going to start on page 17 in the paperback. And it's about maybe a third of the way into chapter 1. And chapter 1 is entitled Realizing What Doesn't Make You Happy. And I'm going to start at the section entitled Time for a Massive Life Shift. Here we go. Here was my deal. If I wanted to find lasting joy in the purest sense, I needed to make a big life change. Yet at the time, I couldn't grasp this. That simple truth was stuffed and hidden away so well in my subconscious that I just didn't recognize it. And so rather than think how, let alone even begin to take action to change my circumstances, I did what I always did when I felt stuck. I put up with my situation. I pushed my frustrations, anguish, and all-consuming stress deep down. I spent another 6 months wallowing in my own resentment, taking another prescribed pill when I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Quite simply, however, to be happy, I needed to do what makes me happy. It's so obvious. I mean, this is the in-your-face basis of this book and your expected jumping off point. Through many months of self-evaluation, 4 words kept creeping into my brain like animated thought bubbles. What makes you happy? What brings you bliss? What completely fulfills you? For a long time, I didn't know how to answer these questions. Lots of people thought I had it made. I spent the last 15 years in the TV news business, the bulk of that time as an on-air meteorologist for a news station in Philadelphia. I met viewers at events or when they came in for station tours, and they'd say, "Your job must be so much fun." I'd always put on an enthusiastic face, my eyes wide, my smile even wider, replying, "Yes, I love it. You're right. It is so much fun." I felt a duty to tell these people what I assumed they wanted to hear. And that fed into this. I tend toward a make the best of it attitude, which meant I managed to find reasons to stay in my position. Making the best of it is great sometimes, like when you're stuck in the excruciatingly long line at Disney's Animal Kingdom waiting to ride Expedition Everest. You're waiting, after all, for the thrill of a big roller coaster drop and state-of-the-art creature effects on your quest to see the Yeti. Knowing what awaits makes the hours of weaving through the entrance ropes worth it, and bonus, you have expertly crafted Himalayan-themed displays to peruse along the way. Or when midday summer construction on the Schuylkill Expressway takes out 2 of the 3 lanes, bringing the already clogged traffic flow to a near standstill, you're bebopping to Hall & Oates as I Can't Go For That with the windows down while inching your car toward the Montgomery Drive exit. A traffic jam session can make those otherwise mind-numbing minutes a lot easier to handle. I've pep talked myself ad nauseum into the idea that my backwards TV schedule of waking up at 2:45 a.m. every weekday was actually good for my family. No, really, it's great. My daughters are still practically babies, so I can be home by 1 p.m. to spend time with them. Since my husband works primarily from home, I get to see him too. The reality? I was always cranky and drained by 1:30 p.m., so I spent that free time napping or just in a daze with zero energy to even read a story to my girls. And forget living a healthy, balanced lifestyle. But on top of that delusion, and over so many years of trying to make peace with my unsettled mind, there was always a bigger distraction to help me stay positive. Planning my wedding, followed by the euphoria of having gotten married, held me over for a while. Building and buying and then furnishing our first house took up my time for a few years. Having twins really kept me occupied, and they still do. But eventually, the spray from the major milestones hose dwindled to a trickle, and I realized I needed to tune into what I really wanted. Why was that so hard? What makes me happy? At the root of this predicament, that broad initial question, what makes me happy? Funny, I knew why I wasn't happy. The awful middle of the night alarm was getting old. I had no motivation, like zero, for almost anything. My morale was so freaking low. Whether it was warranted or not, I felt utterly unappreciated and invisible in my job. I ran on a hamster wheel, on autopilot, but never actually got anywhere different. Look, I don't take for granted for 1 second that the career path I landed on is desirable. I was incredibly lucky for so many reasons. I started out with a salary nearly double what most college grads snagged in their first year out of journalism or broadcasting school, a whopping $30,000. I got to stay in the Northeast, within a 3-hour drive of my family for my entire career. I received opportunities that, trust me, I know a lot of people don't get. The strange delight of Zach Galifianakis creepily photobombing my weather hit. The totally normal delight of Tony Danza serenading me with a ukulele. The sheer glee at getting to introduce Gritty, the Philadelphia Flyers' new mascot, to the city in his TV debut. Did you know his belly button squeaks? The invaluable professional experience of delivering national weather reports for ABC, ESPN, CBS, Fox News, Bloomberg, Big Ten Network, Fox Sports Network, and others, all from a cozy college town studio. I also knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to continue feeling like my soul was being sucked out of me. No one ever accused me of under-exaggerating. I didn't want to be a slave to a rigorous schedule that put a constant glaze over my eyes, left me worn out and grouchy with virtually no social life. It's not a stretch to say that I spent the bulk of my 30s in a weary haze. Most heart-wrenching for me, I didn't want to miss out on my girls growing up. I didn't want to be totally beat every single time they asked me to color with them or to sample the concoction they created for me in their play kitchen. I came home so spent that I couldn't drag myself to the toy chest to pull down Candyland from the high shelf when they asked me to play with them. This devastated me. And then missing their milestones due to an antiquated system of TV sweeps. These are the 3 months out of the year when most news people can't take time off: February, May, and November. That meant I had to miss my daughter's end-of-year preschool party. The day of their special shindig, I sat in my drab, windowless office, glued to my iPhone. 10 miles away, I watched on FaceTime as my girls played in the sandbox, took a nature hike to the bird lookout, and stood in line for pizza. I was so bummed that I missed out. I really wasn't okay with staying in a dream career that forced me to miss a lifetime of special moments. I needed to stop lying to myself. I needed to do what brought me joy. I knew I had what others would kill for and felt insanely guilty that I didn't want it. Granted, I was really good at being an on-air meteorologist and I put in the hard work to get there. However, I tried to convince myself that my path was the stuff my true dreams were made of, when it was actually just misguided gratitude for someone else's dream life. Remember, just because others might want your situation doesn't mean it's your ideal. One woman's trash is most definitely another woman's treasure. I should know. As a DIY gal, I've pulled a dusty, grime-covered window frame out of a barn loft to make decorative wall art that would make Joanna Gaines proud. While I enjoyed a successful career, my job success ranked nowhere close to the top of my things I treasure most list. Bottom line, my career path and its resulting lifestyle wasn't my most honest path to happiness. Ziggy Marley once said, "You can complain because roses have thorns, or you can rejoice because thorns have roses." I genuinely attempted to view the glass as half full. I tried to focus on the positives of an overnight schedule, the time with Steve that I knew fellow colleagues couldn't snag with their significant others, the joy of knowing I'd have every afternoon with the girls and weekends off. Hallelujah. I mean, talk about a blessing in the news business. Oddly, trying to turn my focus to all these reasons why I should be happy with the status quo actually made me feel worse. I'd say to myself, I have so many blessings in my life. Damn, girl, aren't you ashamed this isn't enough to give you joy? Tumultuous though it was, 2018 turned out to be my year of massive realization. Here endeth the reading.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. That was great. So let me ask you a question. When did you determine that your journey needed to become a book? What did you want to accomplish by telling your story?
You know, I had it in my head for a long time that I wanted to write a book. However, I actually thought for a long time that I was going to write a book about the story of when I got shamed for appearing while pregnant on the news. Just a really fast backstory on that in case people don't know, but back in 2015, I was heavily pregnant because I had two buns in the oven as opposed to one. And I was, I weighed 50 extra pounds, and when I would turn to the side on a weather map, I actually would cover up the weather maps because my belly was so big. I mean, I was huge, and I was okay with that, but people gave me serious grief for that. And I ended up like making international headlines when I fought back against the haters and the online shamers. And a really good friend of mine who shows up in the acknowledgments, in fact, his name's Dan. He actually suggested to me that I write a book about that experience and almost like capitalize on the story. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting idea. I think I'd like to do that one day. And then when I finally started writing it, which was about 2 Aprils ago, it turned organically into this story about my journey as opposed to what had happened to me on air. And that story does make an appearance in the book, but it's far from the theme, right? So as I sat down and began to just type out stories as they came in my head in a Google document, and it just expanded and got bigger and bigger, it was almost like a diary entry that turned into more. Like it just continued to expand and develop into this story about my path. And it was interesting in the fact that I wrote a lot of this book as I was living it. So it wasn't like I was looking back on it and reflecting and telling the story after the fact. I think that was part of the reason that I hit writer's block about 3/4 of the way through, was that I was still trying to assess and understand what was going on with me and how I was progressing as a human and, developing as an individual. And that really it was almost like I was writing this in real time. So the long story short of that, I guess, would be I knew I wanted to write a book, but it turned into what it became as I wrote it.
How long did you spend writing the book?
So I started in the spring of 2019, and it was officially published then just a few months ago. So it was just about a year from start to editor that I took to write the first manuscript.
Okay. So tell us about your writing process. Was it energizing or exhausting? Did you have a favorite spot to sit and write? All those fun things.
Yeah, all that good stuff. Well, I will say that I probably broke every rule that any coach would give you in terms of how you're supposed to do it. But it was my first time doing it, and a lot of lessons learned now in having done it one time. But a lot of coaches and people that have written before, they'll say you should get in a routine of trying to write every single day, which just since I was still working a full-time job in the news and had the girls and everything else, there was a lot of other stuff going on that I just couldn't devote that kind of effort every single day. So my process really was if I felt inspired, hopefully when I write another book, it won't go that way. I'm going to try to be a lot more regimented and disciplined about it. But for this specific book, I had a favorite spot in the backyard since I wrote a lot of it during the warm months. We have a swing chair out back and it's just really relaxing back there. And I would sit back there in the afternoons as the weather was turning, and it was for some reason really motivational. It was a really good spot for me to get in the zone, and I was able to write a lot of chapters like just out in our backyard. And then when COVID hit, and I'm the kind of person that desperately needs just total quiet and no distractions to get anything done, I had to get really creative, and I took my work with me. I just packed up my office basically in a bag and drove out to empty parking lots, and I set up a little MiFi so I could access the internet, and I wrote in the front seat of my car because it was all I could really get away with. Because there weren't any coffee shops that were open, like you couldn't go anywhere, and it was too cold to sit outside. So I had to get very creative. And yeah, there was nothing, first of all, nothing routine, and definitely nothing that was traditional about, I would say, the way that I wrote this book.
Yeah. You said about having like your Google Docs. So
yeah,
just, when something popped into your head, you started a new one.
That's a set. Okay. So when I was trying to put my outline together, I was, mind you, at this point, just writing down thoughts. Like I would just vomit thoughts into a Word doc, basically, and then start to organize them gradually. And during all that time, I was also soaking up resources, like watching videos and reading articles, and just learning from real pros that had gone through this process before and learning how they did it. And that's when I came across the idea of the mind map, which really is just taking a bunch of Post-its and mind dumping all your ideas onto different Post-its, slapping them up on poster board or on a wall, and then really organizing your story. And that I ended up doing that probably about a third of the way into writing of the whole thing. So I kind of had an idea, I had things that were already written. I at that point had an idea of where the book was probably going to be going, and was able to organize it a lot more effectively that way. But yeah, it was, it was a really significant learning curve for me, because I just went in with really no understanding of how anybody else did it. I kind of just went in with what worked for me and developed it and altered it and adjusted as I learned more about what was working for other authors. And maybe it would have taken me less time to finish it in that if I would have known all of that ahead of time. But hey, I got it done, right?
When did you work with your editor? Did you work with her along the way or wait till the end? How did that work?
So I found her by sheer coincidence. She reached out to me. She used to listen to me on the radio, and she sort of cold messaged me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I am a professional poet and writer, and I have this service, and I do all these things. I help, write copy for people that are doing marketing, and I help people develop their email funnels, all of this stuff." So she's just a really, really good writer and knows how to do all of these different things with a really good just innate ability to just make people's voice sing, I guess would be a good way of putting it. And she just came upon me at like the perfect time. And I said, I really could use an editor. Would you like to help me with that? And she was excellent. So I found her as I was probably 85% of the way done with the book. And I have to actually give credit. Her name is Nicole Rollander. She's a South Jersey gal. And she is essentially the reason that I finally was able to kick myself in the tush and get the manuscript done, because I was so stuck with writer's block about the time we connected that I said to her, okay, look, I want to have this done by the end of March it was. And she's like, okay, so we've got a deadline now. You're going to get me your manuscript by this date. And because I had some sort of accountability, I was able to actually get it done. So I'm grateful to her for not just helping me really organize, especially she was so helpful with organizing the book. but almost more than anything, just the fact that she helped me get the darn thing finished in the first place.
Yeah, that accountability is key.
It's huge. Yeah.
Absolutely. So in your book, you are very brutally honest about your struggles. And I know for a lot of us, that can be really hard to kind of put that out there. So was that difficult for you, especially knowing that, you know, a bunch of strangers were going to be reading the book?
Yes, 100%. So, yeah, you know, as I was writing it, I would write things down and think to myself, am I really going to have the bravery to put this out to the world? And for the most part, it all made it in the book, you know, talking about my struggle with depression and just a lot of things that were going on behind the scenes with me that nobody would have really known otherwise. And it really hit me hardest what I was actually putting out to the world when I released my book trailer, which is kind of like a movie trailer. And just given my background in video production, I put together this video that was just sort of a nutshell summary of what this book is about. And I remember so many butterflies. Like I'm not even kidding. I thought I was going to vomit the day that I put it out. I was so overcome with nerves over it because it's really vulnerable. And it talks about things that, again, nobody knew about, you know, like even some of my family didn't even know I was going through some of these things. So that was terrifying. But it was interesting too, because when I finally just hit post, I was overcome with dread for like a half hour. And then the overwhelming positivity and support started coming in. And I was like, okay, I've done something important here, and this is going to resonate with people. And it turns out to have done just that for the vast majority of the people that have read it. So terrifying leading up to it, but liberating beyond description after I'd finally gone through with it.
So we know that you have dealt with your fair share of online trolls.
Oh yeah.
Broadcasting days. So what about when it came to your book reviews? Do you pay attention to them? How do you deal with the good and the bad and the ugly?
That's a really good question. And, you know, I do actually just try to take my own advice on that because for, you know, especially like when it starts to come in initially, you're right. I've dealt with a lot of online hate in my years in TV, totally unwarranted, just out of the blue for no reason. People like just send you nasty grams and they don't have anything to do with anything. It's just out of the blue and because they're feeling like they want to pick on somebody that day. So having dealt with so much of that over so many years, I think has slowly built up my skin to the thickest it's ever been. It's not thick enough that it doesn't bother me at this point because I am still human and I'm a Cancer crab. So I'm not only moody, but I'm very sensitive. And I like when I feel things, I feel them very big. So if somebody hurts my feelings, it really does hurt. And I think there could be this illusion sometimes for people that there's no one reading these comments behind the keyboard or that that we never see them or that they're not going to affect us for whatever reason. But I'm here to tell you that is not true because at the end of the day, anybody, whether they're on TV news or whether they've written a book, is a human like anybody else. So back to your question, I've read, I would say, most of my reviews, and they have been mostly positive. And when I got one really bad review, it just was not a book for him. But I think it was a man. I'm not actually sure now that I say that. But this person they actually said flat out, this isn't a book for me. This wasn't written for me. And he went on, or this person went on to explain all the reasons why. And I'm like, well, that's harsh. I don't, that hurt. But I got over it a lot more quickly this time, in part because I took my own advice. And I mentioned this in the book too, that if it's not going to matter 5 years from now, there's no need to spend more than 5 minutes on it right now. And that's one of those things that, I have 95% of these amazing reviews coming in from so many people that found something that resonated or found some inspiration in the book. There's no reason for me to hate or feel upset about this one person. So it was a lot easier to get over that, but it did hurt at first, and they probably always will. I guess that'll at least keep me human,
Absolutely.
That's some good advice. Thank you. So in your book, you talk about your decision to leave broadcasting. So how much time did you give yourself between determining kind of your goals and what you wanted and officially leaving broadcasting?
Right. So from beginning of active planning, it was about 14 months out from the end of my TV contract. So it was well over a year that I gave myself to really strategize and think about and plan and get serious about what would happen if I just said goodbye to a paycheck and a job with benefits and all of that stuff. And that, I didn't even bring it up to my husband for the longest time because it's such a daunting thing to even consider. But I had thought that this might be it even before I signed that last contract. And I think probably the day after I signed my last contract, which was for about 2 years, it would have been for 2 years. That was about the time that I thought, maybe this is it. This might be it for me. And then, so that was 24 months out, and then 14 months out was about the time that I started to really actively, look at finances and begin to strategize and plan what life was going to look like for us as a family, because it's one thing to have a dream and turn that into a goal. It's another thing to put practicality into that decision, because we do still have to put food on the table. We do still have, mortgage to pay and a car to pay off and all of those things. And I was not about to just disregard my husband's role in all of this, and he's been such a support, without taking really thoughtful and reflective steps on how we'd be able to pull this off as a family and still be comfortable at the same time. We asked ourselves, what are we willing to give up? What are we willing to rearrange and do without if we're going to make this dream a reality for me?
Did you ever second guess that decision?
Totally. Oh, yes, absolutely. Because it's a really big decision. Deciding who the man was that I wanted to marry, that was like a no-brainer. Like those kinds of what seemed to be really big decisions were so minuscule in comparison to this one. This was the most terrifying choice I've ever made in my life. But I just deep down knew so desperately that I had to, something had to give. So I did second guess it for all the practical reasons, but I still knew it was something that I had to make happen some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So that actually perfectly leads me to the next thing I wanted to ask you about. So you talked a little bit about you and your husband kind of strategizing about, what you maybe would give up or do differently. When you did leave your position. So, for a lot of us, it's not a reality that we're going to be able to leave our paycheck. So what kind of advice might you give us, just dealing with that everyday grind?
Yeah, it's such a big deal. It's such a big deal. And I certainly never took it lightly, and I would never advise anybody to take it lightly. It's not like, well, I'm not happy, I'm just going to quit my job the next day. That just doesn't make sense. It is a really, really tough hurdle. But I am still a full believer that this is attainable. It takes work, especially on the front end. I really do believe that it can be done. And I don't think anybody is likely to ever just flip a switch and have everything magically fall in line. But my advice would be reverse engineer it. What is your goal? It's potentially going to take you a long time to get there. And for me, it took well over a year. But I knew what my big goal was, which was to have the freedom to make my own schedule And even at that point, when I knew what that goal was, I wasn't exactly sure what the steps were going to be to get me there. But looking back, like, here's my goal. This is where I want to be in 14 months. And now I'm 14 months removed from that. How do I reverse engineer it and make that happen in 14 months? And that meant things like I said, taking a really hard look at finances, rearranging accounts, cutting back. I paid off credit cards while I still had a paycheck. I did all of those kinds of things, at least from the financial standpoint, while I still could. And then all the while, with any free time I had, I was working on this goal, which was to write a book. And as I was figuring out exactly where I wanted to turn my focus professionally, I was outlining my online course that I'm currently working on. I was, writing sections of the book when I had the inspiration, like we talked about, creating videos, and developing this separate audience that was removed from CBS and doing it on a YouTube channel dedicated to all things DIY. And yeah, it was exhausting, but totally energizing at the same time, because I finally had this purpose that I was working toward. I knew I was working toward an end goal by doing all of this work. And also I was having passion for it, which was something that I didn't have in the job that I was currently receiving a paycheck to do. So I think the best advice I'd have is have your goal. Like, don't think of it as a dream. Think of it as an actual goal with ways that you're going to accomplish it and actual steps that you're going to take to achieve whatever it may be. And then reverse engineer it to figure out how much money you would need to make in order to remove your full-time job and do this full-time. And that's how you just slowly and maybe painstakingly and maybe as a side hustle, just gradually get there. But I really do stress, like, I really believe that if you have a dream or a goal to do something totally different, that you can do it, but you're going to work for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So I want to kind of switch topics a little bit. Delaware County Libraries and some other influential libraries are mentioned in your book. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Tell us more about the impact that libraries have had on your life.
Absolutely. I would say huge impact. And my love affair with the library goes back to childhood. I grew up in a low-income household, and so we had to rely on inexpensive and or free activities for most things that we did. And the library was right up there. I think we went, whatever the checkout period was at the Allentown Public Library, that was the window of time in between every single visit. We would always go. And my mom is definitely the reason that I have this instilled love of reading. And it's one of my favorite pastimes. I mean, I'm reading a book by Curtis Sittenfeld right now. And yeah, I can't read them quickly enough. Like, I love reading so much. And, at least back when I was a kid, getting to go to the library just based on my socioeconomic status was kind of like getting a present every couple of weeks. So I just loved it so much. And over the years, the different library systems that I was a part of, just based on where I moved to, were just the best introduction to all these amazing authors. I read Gone with the Wind thanks to the Schloss Center Regional Library and State College. I blew through probably most, if not all, of Agatha Christie's work. The Harry Potter series I blew through thanks to the Bethlehem area library. And yeah, I think I'm on book number, I've been regressively reading the Nancy Drew series, and right now I think I'm on book number 48 or 9. I've been reading all the Nancy Drew books through the Delaware County Library System since I think like 3 summers ago. So it's just, it's one of these things. It's like, it's so ingrained. Like, I just love it so much. It's part of who I am as a person, is to check out my books from the library. Like, I would so much rather check my book out at the library and return it than have a room full of clutter. But yeah, it means a lot to me,
That's awesome. So you told us about a couple of the books that you have been reading or are reading now. What's your number one favorite all-time book?
Favorite of all time is absolutely hands down Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Another one, like my mom has instilled, I realize this as I talk to people about stories behind the book now. She is such a huge influence on so much of who I am. And she always loved that story, and she gave me my first copy of that book when I was probably 9 or 10. And I still have it. It's actually on my nightstand even as we speak. And it's just one of those stories that it just resonates for me. And I absolutely love it. And I watch the Winona Ryder version of the movie every Christmas. I love the story, and I find some way to relive it, whether it's through a film or reading it over and over again every single year, actually.
Have you shared it with your girls yet?
Not yet. What would be the most grown-up book I've shared with them so far? Because they just turned 5, so they're still pretty little. But I did. There's a book called All of a Kind Family. I forget the author's name. But it's about, I think, 5 little sisters growing up in New York in like the 1915-ish or 1970, like really early century. And I read that chapter book to them when I was home on maternity leave with them. So they were only a couple of weeks old. But I know how important it is to just read to your children for so much of their developmental growth. So that was maybe more of like a vicarious thing for me because I love that story so much. But yeah, when they couldn't understand a word I said, but I read them an entire chapter book when they were a couple weeks old.
I love that.
Put on social media a lot how you're taking them to the library. Do they share your love of reading?
Love it. Yeah, they really do. And at the moment, just because of everything happening with COVID and just the restrictions, and even though the library is open right now, I'm the only one that goes right now. So I'm in charge of picking out their books, and they'll tell me like, Mommy, find a book about dinosaurs, find a book about trucks, or so they'll give me instructions on what kind of material they want me to bring home for them. And I do my best to find what it is they want. Yeah. Yeah, they're actually part of the 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten reading challenge right now. So but reading and books it's one of the biggest lessons that I try to instill in them.
That's awesome.
So what's next for Katie? What's coming up for you? What are you working on?
Yeah. So once the book was done, I knew that I could sort of like really focus on other things. And I was trying for a while to do everything at once. That just did not work. It was just too much stuff, and I couldn't focus well enough on any one thing. So I had been doing my DIY YouTube channel. I took a hiatus from that to finish the book and try to just knock out some of these other projects. And the other projects are to break into public speaking. And I've been doing that here and there. I've been doing a lot of MC work for nonprofits. And I just did a keynote for the Selfish Philly conference this past Friday, which was a women's self-care conference. That was amazing. So that is one of the avenues that I'm trying to go down right now. And then also the other really big sort of tangible project is this course that I'm working on. So I know all things video and video production, and having done 15 years of broadcasting in the professional space, and then also on the side, single-handedly and solo produced an entire channel by myself from scratch. I bring like 2 interesting aspects to the topic of video production. That's what I want to pass on to people and teach them. So if you are an amateur or just a beginner video content creator, whether you're a small business and you don't want to pay a production company, or you've got a nonprofit and you want to create videos for that and for your team, or you just want to start a YouTube channel, I'm going to put this course together to show you how to do that from A to Z. And that's everything from being in front of the camera, being behind the camera, how to use the equipment, but all in a non-techie, easy to understand way. And I would like to think that I'm a pretty decent teacher. So I'm hopeful that that's going to be a good success. And hopefully that's going to come out toward the end of the year.
That's going to be good timing. I know.
Yes. Like Christmas is around the corner, and
lots of video production going on around.
Right. Right.
So Katie, those are the questions that Teresa and I had for you. So we're hoping that maybe some of our audience has a few questions, and I do see some in the chat. So I'll pull one from the chat here, and then if anybody wants to do a hand raise and ask your question live, we'll be happy to do that. Diane wants to know if you are still a weather geek, or do you never want to talk about weather again?
I love that question. I find myself sort of a happy medium. It's funny. Was it 2 weeks ago? I think I got caught in the rain, which never would have happened if I was looking at the weather regularly. But this is what happens when you're not looking at the models on a day-to-day basis. So I'm still very much and very thoroughly interested in it. I did develop a real passion for it when I was working with expert meteorologists at AccuWeather, and that's the whole reason I decided to go back to school to become a meteorologist, was that the interest for that subject was really fostered in me through my training at AccuWeather. But yeah, it's funny. I just at this point don't quite have the time to look at it in anywhere near as much detail as I ever used to. So I'll open up my app and kind of like look at the hourly on a daily basis, but I don't really dive in deep and look at the models but once every couple of weeks. So yeah, passion's still there. The physical, the physical hobby, I guess, has waned quite a bit.
Joyce asks, who believed in you the most that helped move you forward?
I got to give credit to my husband on this one. He's an interesting guy. Like, he's amazing. I wouldn't call him like a cheerleader per se, but I know is like my number one support. I can go to him about anything. He understands, he gets it. Like, he's my number one shoulder to lean on. And with this decision, because I felt a couple of feelings. I mean, first of all, terrified to tell anybody that I was considering this in the first place. Our family didn't know. We didn't actually tell anybody that this was something I was seriously considering until really close to the time that I announced it to the world. So Steve was quite literally the number one and actually only support system I had through all of this, but he was enough because he really was just that much of a shoulder for me to constantly lean on and talk things out. And he was, so supportive and did what he could to, look at our situation together and figure out how we could make this happen for me. So you really need support like that in your life. And I know that may be hard to come by, but yeah, if I didn't have him, I'm not sure that this ever would have happened the way it did.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds like you guys have a great partnership.
He's amazing. Yeah. He's a good guy. He will never be on camera, though. People ask me about that a lot. He hates the spotlight, to the point that people think that he is just a figment of my imagination because they never see him. I swear he exists.
For once, Katie, maybe one of your he was in the background or something.
Yeah, it's so rare. There was, I think, a time that he showed up in one of my DIY videos because I needed him to like hold a plank for me or something. And I said to him, I'm like, you realize this means you're going to have to show up on camera. He's like, all right. And he put a hat on so he could cover his face. It was just, yeah, he despises the spotlight. I'll let him have that.
Emmy wants to know if any of your family members helped you in your writing. Helped remember stories, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I don't think, well, there was some research that I did for chapter 2. For anybody that's read the book, chapter 2 talks about a good friend of ours that got diagnosed with brain cancer. And so I did some very specific research on that because I wanted to tell their family story exactly. But most of the rest of the stories, a lot of them were my recollection of how things had happened. And didn't really require fact checking or any kind of additional information from family. And I think also part of that too is that it really is just it's a memoir. Like it's so much about an internal journey that the way I remembered things felt like the right way to tell the story. There wasn't, yeah, again, though, there wasn't a lot of detail that really required I reach out and find out more.
Mm-hmm. I was pretty impressed with your memory of your younger years, though.
Yeah.
I don't remember things. And so
there's some things that just stick with you, right? And I mean, I probably exhausted my options in this book. I'm not sure I could tell you anything else that happened in my childhood other than what you'll read in the book at this point.
Kathy wants to know if anything was edited out of the book that you want to tell us about now.
Oh, that's a good question. Most of it is in there. My editor did, it's interesting. My editor actually, when she came back and we sort of did a debrief after she had made all of her edits and cuts and whatnot, she said to me over the phone, she's like, I think you've got something really solid here. This is the kind of story that I totally relate to, it being a mom and being in the working world and all of this stuff. And then she's like, but you were really, really hard on yourself. And she was right. The way I portrayed a lot of these stories was that I was sort of more at fault than I really probably was in a lot of the stories that I tell. And she kind of forced that out because I had this, it's even something I talk about in the book, that I feel sometimes like I'm unworthy. And that clearly came out in the way I wrote about myself as a character in some of these stories. Trying to think of specific examples of that. Oh, I actually, I can think of one right now. So in chapter 1, I think it is. Yeah, I think it's chapter 1. But I talk about how I woke up one morning. Yes, it's chapter 1. I woke up one morning just on the wrong side of the bed. It was a miserable, horrible day. It was Cinco de Mayo. And I just was not myself. And I was just a miserable wreck that day for no reason whatsoever. I had no reason in my mind anyway. And I wrote about it in a way that put so much just blame, I guess, on myself, that Nicole helped me to just frame it in a different way, that, we all have bad days. It's okay to have bad days. There was obviously a problem here that needed fixing, but we got to change out some of these words because you're just being way too hard on yourself. So that's one example I can think of off the top of my head, that she was really specific to change things around a little bit.
Well, Sherry has a good follow-up question. You were being hard on yourself there. And now Sherry wants to know, what kind of self-care? How are you implementing self-care during the pandemic?
I think that's so important. Let me just say that right off the bat. I didn't quite appreciate how necessary and critical self-care really is to us, just, obviously just being the best versions of ourselves, because we can't show up for ourselves or anybody that matters to us and fill all the roles that we fill without making sure that, with the analogy of the masks in the airplane, we put our own masks on first and then we put on the people's next to us. It's so important. My favorite ways, though, to practice self-care right now are yoga every day. I do it every day now. My body gets angry at me if I don't. And I just drink my 2 cups of hazelnut coffee every day. There is certain routine that I go through. I try to continue the lifelong learning. That it has been a really critical part of self-care for me, because it just lights a fire in me to learn more about anything, whether that's a webinar or a podcast or just a series of video tutorials on YouTube, whatever it is. Cultivating that love of learning has actually been really, really crucial in helping me to get out of the slump that I was in. And reading's really the other one. I will gobble up mystery novels every 2 weeks. Right now it's not a mystery or a psycho thriller, although I did just finish Closed Casket by Sophie Hannah, which is sort of the next version of the Hercule Poirot mysteries, and she writes in the vein of Agatha Christie. It was a really good read. I would definitely recommend that. But I'm reading Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld right now, and that's a really, really good read. I'm not sure how old that book is, but I think it might be one of her earlier works. I'm just getting around to her now, and she's really good.
Nice. Well, let's see. I think we asked the questions that were in chat. Does anybody want to be brave and unmute themselves? Have any last questions that you'd like to ask of Katie before we say goodnight?
I do see one question from Kim, just asking if I still talk with any of the CBS 3 gang. And there are a handful, and I'll just quickly answer that if that's okay. There are a handful that I do still talk to. Pat Gallen is probably the number one that I still chat with, and he's very busy with his little guy at home now that he's a dad. But yeah, I would say that the people on the morning team are the ones I keep the closest in contact with. And I think they understand more than most kind of what the struggle was like. I don't think they lived it anywhere close in the same way that I did, but they understand it. So I've received, just notes for anybody that's read the book. They'll give me their feedback, and it's so far been positive, which is nice. And it's nice to also have like just understanding from people who know exactly, like I made a really specific point not to use names in any stories that were difficult stories, or I didn't want people to look bad. But anybody that read those stories and knew exactly who I was talking about, it was just nice to be able to talk to anybody that completely got what I was saying,
Mm-hmm. Do you miss the broadcasting life at all?
I would say that I miss the actual work,
Okay.
but everything else that went with it, not at all. The alarm was never going to become normal. That was never going to get easy. And then it's a corporation, so there's bureaucracy and a lot of things that I didn't really like to have to work with. So yeah, I guess the operational side of it, I don't miss. The actual work of having like a giant mic up in my face and all like that kind of stuff, I still really do love to do. So getting to do it in a professional sense is, I might have a twinge of missing it, but not enough that I feel like I have any regrets over leaving.
Well, that seems like
that's a good thing.
Yeah. That's the way to feel, I guess. Well, thank you. Let's see. I don't think I missed anybody else. So Teresa, I'm gonna throw it over to you.
Thank you. So thank you, Katie. We really appreciate you doing this with us. We had a blast. We hope you did too. Before we cut out though, I just want to ask you, what's your best tip for looking Zoom ready? We all have our Zoom calls and we're on Zoom all day at work and family. So what's your best tip for us?
My number one tip would be make sure that your camera is at your webcam is at the correct height. So I am actually sitting right now with my computer on a box that's, probably 3 or 4 inches high, so that the computer can go right to my eye level or slightly above, because when you're sitting up like this, it's going to look up at you and it'll end up giving you Frankenstein eyes, and it's just not a good look. So trying to have the camera either at or slightly above eye level is ideal. If you choose to wear makeup, you don't need a ton of it, but that always helps. And let me see, are there any lighting? If you don't have, like I have a professional ring light up right now, you don't need that. But whatever your space is, you want to be facing the light so that the light is directly on you. And that's going to be absolutely the number one most flattering way to look on Zoom.
Thank you for that, Katie.
I do have one plug, if I may.
Please.
Sure.
Okay, so since it's Delco, I am really excited that I have another book signing coming up on Friday, and I'm going to be doing that in Havertown, which is my town, over at Danielle Foster Creations. And she is a photographer, so, you know, a lot of the bookstores aren't doing much right now, but Danielle was nice enough to allow me to host something at her photography studio. And you can come out if you already have a book. You can come out, bring your book, and I'll gladly sign it. And you can also get a digital image from Danielle if you'd like for $10. And I will also have books available on site for purchase. And I'm actually going to pop the link to it in the chat just in case you want to check that out. And there it is. So that's this Friday at Danielle Foster Creations in Havertown from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m.
That sounds fantastic. And also don't forget that you can check out the book from the library.
I won't sign your library book, but I will.
And also it's on our in our digital collection on Libby and Overdrive. So you can find Katie
So awesome.
all over the place.
I just have to say too, like that is one of the most surreal parts about this was finding out that I was in the catalog. It seriously blew my mind. I'm not sure why that was one of the most surreal parts of this for me, but it really was. And I'm not even kidding. I have actually daydreamed about like browsing the shelves at the library and coming across my book. And now I can actually do that. It's so amazing.
Well, they're all on hold right now, Katie, so you won't be able to stumble upon them. But that's better, right?
That's incredibly humbling and gratifying. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been amazing. I'm so happy we got to do this, and I'm so grateful to everybody that jumped on here. This has been a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you again. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.